basically, all elections boil down to first about the quality and character of the voter. And the reason we have the problems we have in America today is a result of the low-quality voters, the low-quality citizens that we have in America. Present company accepted from that. But every election that's really a contended election is about the differences between the candidates. And as Lori just said, Darrell Sorrells is very much a strict constitutionalist, and he's very solid on the Second Amendment. Now, Miles Hall from H&H Range has just come out and endorsed Sheriff Wetzel because of his strong support for the Second Amendment. But how many of you know that in the, I want to say it was was it 95, 94, 80, it was 84 and 85, I believe. Sheriff Wetzel was the president of the International Chiefs of Police Association. Yeah, and in that position, at their banquet, President Bill Clinton came to that banquet and publicly called out Sheriff Wetzel and thanked him for his efforts in passing the Brady Bill.
That's right.
Now, I'm sorry, folks, but the Brady Bill is not pro-Second Amendment by any shape, form, or fashion. Another thing that was going on at the same time while he was president is there were efforts being made by that organization to strategize how to keep the states from passing concealed carry laws. Now, he may claim to be Second Amendment today friendly, maybe he is, but certainly is not his past history. And I'm really troubled by, very troubled by our former DA, Wes Lane, being a part of the TV ad on behalf of Wetzel. Wes Lane puts everything in his life that's preeminent of his Christianity. Now, I don't know what Wetzel's Christianity is other than perhaps Old Germany Restaurant. But I can tell you this, that for many years, Darrell Sorrells sat under Tom Hill, and Tom Hill was a Sunday school teacher for many years. And while a deputy at the county jail, without the help of Sheriff Wetzel, Darrell Sorrells was able to get a small effort going on the Character First program for the employees. One of the things that he wants to do if elected sheriff is to expand those opportunities for the employees as well as make Character First available to the inmates. And probably nothing is more important when people are incarcerated or have been criminals or have done wrong in their life, probably nothing more important than to lead them to Christ, and more important than that, to teach them the principles of good character and such as that, which, of course, not in the actual framework of the information of Character First is references to religion, but all those character traits are based upon the Bible, every single one of them. So there's really a pretty significant difference. Another thing that's really bothering me, right now we have a very high-profile case that has just been instituted in Oklahoma City, where we have Teddy Mitchell, who had been running a very big-time gambling operation right out of his home for a long time. And if not for the murder of his wife recently, and I'm going to speculate, and I'm not going to speculate as to who that came from, but without the recent murder of his wife, there had probably never been any light brought to his gambling operation. But you cannot convince me that a gambling operation of that size was going on unnoticed by Oklahoma City Police or the Oklahoma County Sheriff, and perhaps even district attorneys. You can't convince me that that was going on. We're talking a multi-million-dollar gambling operation right out of his home. And we now see that Sheriff Wetzel has just sent back significant contributions to Teddy Mitchell for his longtime support in his campaigns. I could go on and on about little things like this. This doesn't prove anything, but it just looks really stinky to me. And I could go on and on about things, and and I will in my email if I can get it out tomorrow morning. I'm really trying, folks. Let's introduce, we have dignitary with us here today, and State Representative Lewis Moore. Please give him a welcome for One other thing I mentioned last week, I hope that there's some of you that can go as soon as this meeting is over with down to the boondoggle in Oklahoma City known as the American Heritage and American Indian and Heritage Center, whatever it's called there. And I made some signs up. We're going to take a picture. I have an intended use for the picture. But I made some extra signs. If you didn't make your own, it says, "Monument to the recently awakened Oklahoma taxpayers. No to more tax dollars being spent on this project. The citizens of the state of Oklahoma are on the hook for about $85 million in bonded indebtedness to build that thing. And it's only halfway built. And I'm going to tell you, you can go down to Sulphur and see the facility that Chickasaws have put in on their own for $40 million, and it is a finer looking facility than this one here that's supposed to be a $160 million facility. And on top of that, after just getting back from a trip to South Dakota and seeing Crazy Horse, thanks to the New American Magazine, the great article that was done about the free enterprise entrepreneurial effort to build that and refusing to take any money from state or federal government. What I saw in South Dakota puts this little thing to shame down here. It's absolutely shameful, the amount of money that we put in it. And so it's time for lawmakers to find another solution to that without spending one more penny of taxpayer dollars. How many of you think you'll have a few minutes to run down there with me after this meeting? We got one here. Anyone else? Okay. Anybody that can run down there? We're just going to take a picture and hold up some signs. Got some more. Okay, we'll just hold up some signs, and there may be some more people meet us there because I put it in the email. Targeted time be 2 o'clock to take the picture, and I've got to get to work after that. So, okay, well, folks, we're going to get on with our meeting here, and I will tell you this, that I'm very happy to have with us today the CEO of the John Birch Society. His name is Mr. Art Thompson. I believe Art is originally from Seattle, Washington, if I remember correctly. And the first time I ever heard Art speak was probably a dozen or more years ago. And he was talking about, I believe, the time of the 1960s. And the environment was very good at that time. A lot of alertness to the dangers of communism and such as that. And they were actually, through Art's good leadership there at that time as a section leader or whatever he was, they were starting chapters about every 2 or 3 blocks, starting chapters up. And we're talking multitudes of chapters. And of course, the society became so influential that the determination was made that it can no longer be ignored. So there had to be a smear, there had to be an effort to destroy the society. And so on direct orders from Moscow, 2 of the communist newspapers, or one of them in the United States, published an article. It was a hit piece on the society. And Mr. Welch, the founder, found out that a reporter for one of the leading mainstream magazines was going to do an article on the society, so he made an appointment with him. He takes this article from the communist newspaper and points out all the inaccuracies in it, and then explains to him what the John Birch Society had discovered and had found. And in doing so, he had hoped to avoid bad publicity. And when the article came out a few days later, it was almost verbatim what was in the communist newspaper. And that was the beginning of the smear. And you know, in more modern day context, we've seen the left, the communists, the socialists, the progressives, whatever you want to call them in this country. We've seen them try to smear the Tea Parties. We've seen them try to smear Fox. We've seen them try to smear Sarah Palin, just so many of the conservative movements today. And I would suggest to you that there's no more evidence for the smears today than there was for the John Birch Society. Only difference is it's all spread out now. We were the focus of it at that point in time. And anyway, it had its effect. And there was a time, certainly, it took a lot of courage to be a Bircher. But today, because we have stayed true to the evidence and the information that we have found for 50-some years now, because of that, and the fact that so much of what we have uncovered and predicted would happen has been right on. It's earned a lot of respect for the society for anyone that has the intellectual honesty and the willingness to examine the evidence and let it lead to where it's going to lead. In addition to Art being here, we have the Vice President of the Society here, Mr. Larry Waters. Larry, would you please stand? Please give Larry a hand. I understand Larry will be retiring fairly soon, is that correct?
That's what I hear.
How many years have you been in this society?
I've got a number, 51 years on the staff.
51 years. That's really something when the society's only 55 years old this year, I believe. So anyway, please welcome Mr. Art Thompson. Very glad to have
you. Well, I was going to talk about something, and I've already found 5 things I want to talk about since he's started. It's very hard to keep quiet on some of these subjects, but let me just say 2 things before I get started. That's 1, excuse me. Not A and B of 2, it's 1 and 2 of 2. Right? Anyway, firstly, let me say that just because an individual professes to be pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, does not make them an individual whom you want to support. Certainly you've got a primary example of that just south of you here in Texas with the governor down there, Rick Perry, who is pro-life and Second Amendment, but wants to build that highway from Mexico all the way up through the United States and help form the North American Union. Well, if you support the Second Amendment and you're anti-abortion, everything that you say you stand for will be destroyed if we lose our sovereignty. If we can no longer say what our opinions are on these matters, and the United Nations or some subsidiary of the United Nations tells us what we're going to do and believe, then it won't matter what you say you profess. You know, and don't get me wrong here, but I just want to give you an idea that not every issue will save this country. Let's take, for instance, the pro-life issue. It's like a body has cancer. In a man, he's got prostate, he's got lung, he's got bone, he's got every kind of cancer you can possibly think of. But if you say that you save him from prostate cancer, doesn't mean he's going to live. And so if you save any one of these issues, doesn't mean the body politic will survive. So you have to look at what is it that is being programmed, what is being worked on by the other side to bring this country down. What are the most strategic issues that you can work on to defeat them? Because this is all being manipulated. It is by design, it is not by happenstance. It is not moral deterioration in and of itself. It is a deliberate design to deteriorate morality in this country and the Republic and the Constitution, etc. So what is it that we can work on that will stop that? There's 3 things primarily that will do that. Number 1, to maintain our local police so that they not become nationalized. You cannot have a dictatorship in a country without a national police force. That's simple. Secondly, we need to stop the North American Union. And third, as part of that, is the United Nations. If you're not working on those 3 things, or some adjunct like Agenda 21 that fits within that program, you're going to lose your country. That's simple. We've been able to do that in the past with the John Birch Society on these particular strategic issues to where we slowed them down by an absolute minimum 40 years off their timetable. But you look around and you ask yourself what other organizations are working on these things. Working, not talking. And you find there aren't any. And so the thing is basically the Birch Society doing that. So, what was the second one, you remember?
Can we go through my spiel again?
Yeah, probably would be able to do that. But Simon, by the way, kind of do something in a couple of minutes before I want to shut up, will you? Because otherwise I won't wind down for a long, long time. I want to talk to you a little bit about the history of voting and the Electoral College in this country. First of all, we started out in this country with everybody knowing how everybody else votes. There was no secret ballot. Everybody went down to the church or the town hall or met in the square, like they still do in some areas of some cantons in Switzerland. And when the vote or the issue came up, everybody, you know, if they were sitting, they stood. If they stood, they held their hands up, and they just counted noses, so to speak. So everybody knew how everybody else voted. There was no secret ballot. And that's where the term stand-up man came from, by the way. If you said that you stood for something, and then you did that in the meeting, and you stood for your vote on that issue or on that candidate, you were a stand-up guy. In other words, you put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. And that's where that expression came from. Well, after a while, because of the intimidation that occurred from time to time, I mean, you know, there'd be local goons that would say, if we catch you voting for this fellow, you know, we're going to take you out in the street. So as a result of that, they agitated for a secret ballot. Once the secret ballot came in, then it didn't matter how you voted, it mattered how you counted the votes. You see, whoever had control of the ballot box had control of the elections. Now, generally speaking, we know that the average American was a good, honest guy, and we had pretty good elections. But there was still that intimidation that was involved there, particularly if you study the history of Tammany in New York. They would actually go down to the polls armed, and if they knew that you were going to go vote for somebody that wasn't a Tammany candidate, you went home. And that's the way it was. That's how bad it had gotten in some areas. That was the way it was in some rural areas on the frontier of the country, and what was now called the Midwest, that people would be intimidated that way. Now, it didn't matter what kind of a ballot you put in there. It was your choice. You just took a slip of paper or whatever, and you put it in the ballot box. And some papers, like the St. Louis Democrat or the whatever Republican, would have a whole sheet where you just stuck that in the ballot box. You tore it out of the paper, put it in the ballot box, because you were going to vote a party ticket. And so what happened then, after a while, it was kind of sloppy, but you know, it worked. But then they started to agitate for something called the Australian ballot. Now, the Australian ballot came in the 1880s, in that time frame, and that was where the government started to print the ballots. Well, that was nice and neat, but it also was neat for the government to be able to say who goes on the ballot. You see, before, you didn't have the kind of a thing where you nominated everybody, particularly you just went and voted for people. That was just the way it was. But now, with the Australian ballot, where the government starts to print the ballots, they can keep people off the ballot. How many remember the Pat Buchanan campaign with the Reform Party? There were several states that kept him off the ballot because they didn't like his politics. And his vice presidential candidate with him was a black lady who happened to be a member of the John Birch Society. Isola Foster. So they didn't like him, they kept him off the ballot. That has happened. Gee, has that happened in this last election with anybody that you might think about that? And so that's the sort of power that gradually kept being given and centralized into the hands of the government. The official position of the society, by the way, is paper ballots, to where 3 people at the ballot box can open up that ballot box and count them. You can't corrupt 3 people in every precinct in the United States. You can't do that. But you can corrupt it if you're the programmer of a computerized method of voting. And so we know that these things have happened. Let me give you an example. Where I come from, Washington State originally, I had a mutual acquaintance of a man who was a Democrat, and I disagreed with him on a few things, but he was kind of a funny guy, and he was on TV, and in fact, he was one of these fellows that when television first started out, you always had a commentator before the movie. Remember those days for you guys older? If you hold up your hand, you're giving away your age. The thing is that they would come on and introduce the movie, kind of like they do on the Turner Classic Movies. And so he would come on sometimes and he would say, now we have to pause for station identification. Remember those days you had to pause and say what station it was? That was a federal law. So he would pause, he says, we have to pause now for station identification because the federal government thinks you're too stupid to know what channel you're watching. So, my kind of guy. Well, anyway, he ran in the primary for the Democrat position on the ballot for Congress. And the night of the election, when it was all over, about 8:30 or 9 o'clock, they started to get the votes in, and he said, wait a minute. And he had a lot of counties in his congressional district. He says, I only campaigned in 9 of those counties, and they were the most populous. I came in 3rd in those counties. In the counties that I didn't campaign in, I came in 1st. Now, am I that bad a campaigner, or is there some other common denominator in these 9 counties? So he realized these 9 counties are the first counties to go on computerized voting. So he ran down to a judge, and he says, hey judge, let's hand count these things. So they got an injunction, they hand counted them. He came in 1st in all of those 9 counties. With the hand count, the computer said otherwise. He started to do some research, and he found out that 80 to 85% of all the computerized voting in the United States came out of one software firm. Can you imagine the kind of control over the elections on a thing like that? And he wrote a book. I don't even have a copy left, but I bought 100 in a case once, and I gave them all away. I didn't even keep one for myself, to my regret. But he went down and documented the early days of computerized voting in this country. And the fact that there had been studies made by such places like UCLA, Southern California, that they committed voter fraud. Now, this is just a case, this isn't an actual thing, but they committed voter fraud and then had another group at the university say, okay, now figure out how we did it. They never were able to. Because you can program these things to do test after test after test, and it'll all come up great, except the real count. And you'd never go back and find out otherwise. So computerized voting puts even more centralization into the hands of the outcome, and the outcome of these things into the hands of people we don't even know who they are. They're programmers and that kind of thing. And they tend to be limited to a very few companies doing these things. Some counties do it on their own, some don't. We even, many of you may even recall Bill Cherry. He was a poll watcher once at a precinct. When we used to have those machines, you go in and you go click, 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 and then you do this and open up the curtain. Well, he would not allow the voting to go forward in this precinct where he was one of the judges until they unsealed the back of one of these machines, or all of them actually, and and verify that it was 000. You see, because if it's not 000, you don't get a good count. Well, it wasn't 000. So I don't remember if they added or subtracted. See, if you don't like a guy, you can put it at, let's say, 950. And it won't even start counting until you got 50 votes in there, see? It is 1,000. Or you could do it the other way. A guy you like, you add 50 right away, whatever in that particular precinct. So these things do happen. We're kind of naive if we don't think so. Nevada, for instance, just to give you an idea, I talked to Ron Paul personally about this. I said, I don't quite understand what happened to you in Nevada in the primary. And Ron is kind of a laid back, doesn't really He's not an in-your-face kind of candidate, let's put it that way. And he says, well, it doesn't really make too much sense. He says, what we did in every state where we went on the ballot was we would have banks of people calling around and finding out how they were going to vote. You know, we called the voters. And he said we were never off more than 15% of what we discovered. He says in Nevada, we had identified 26,000 people who were going to vote in the primary. And I think it was only about 9,000 ever voted for him. Now 26,000 that were going to vote for Ron Paul. You see. Now a funny thing about Nevada, they have slot machines there. And they have voting machines, and it's my understanding the same people control both, and you don't win on either one of them. Remember Reed, when he was up the last time? The exit polls showed that he was down 15%. But when the vote came out, he was ahead 15%. So there's a lot of disparigency between what is being tallied and what is being reported as the outcome in some of these elections. It's a real problem. So what we need to do is to go back to a system where you, the voter, can verify the count. You know, we'll have the secret ballot, but it should be on paper that anybody can count right there on the spot, post it on the precinct. You know, you can't even do that now at these precincts. You got to take it into the master computer and have them counted. How many of you heard just the other day that these people were out early voting and voting for Romney and it kept coming up Obama?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Well, that's just a minor adjustment, you understand, that they have to make on the machine. Minor adjustment. That's not an adjustment. That is not a problem with a simple adjustment. It is fraud.
Yes.
And so we don't know a lot of times really what the outcome is. So we have to go back to a system where we in our own precincts can verify the count. It's that simple in order to maintain our freedom. And so let me talk a moment about the Electoral College. Because the Electoral College is probably the most innovative and masterful thing that our forefathers gave us. Now, under its current way they do it, not necessarily, but in its original, it was unbelievable. What happened was that, you know, the electors, most of them, well, let me explain something. We have lost states' rights over a period, and I don't even like states' rights. It's a bad thing to say. We have lost state sovereignty over the years due to a number of different things, and the Electoral College is one of them, in the name of maintaining state sovereignty. The first thing that they did, most states did not elect the electors like they do now. It was done by the legislatures, just like they used to elect the senators. They elected the senators. That was changed in 1914. That took a lot of state sovereignty away because they just represented the people in their states, not the state governments. And they did the same with the Electoral College earlier on by agitating that, no, the people have to vote for the electors, not the states. So by the time of Andrew Jackson, that was pretty much the way they did it. And so that completely took away a lot of the checks and balances between the states and the federal government. But there was another thing that took away a check and balance as well. And that is, very early on, what they would do is the Electoral College would vote, and the top vote getter was president. The guy who came in second was vice president. That's the way it was. They didn't have to be from the same faction or party. Now, can you imagine the checks and balance that would be in the executive branch if you've got two guys from two different factions and two different parties in those two positions? Yeah, they fight. Good. Keeps them from fighting me. But that's the way it was. It kept them from doing things that we would not want a federal government, a centralized government, doing. Well, as soon as they came along with the party system, which, by the way, if you really look at history, the party system was given to us by revolutionary France. That's really where the whole concept of this thing came from. In the democratic societies, Jacobin clubs, that was all agitated by revolutionary France, which formed the Democrat Party. It was originally called the Republican Party. That's a hint, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. It was originally called the Republican Party, then the Republicans and then the Democrats. But they agitated that, no, we don't want that system in the electoral college. We want it so that both the president and the vice president are from the same party. Now, Madison told us in Federalist Paper number 47 that if the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches are all from one party, it is tantamount to being a dictatorship. Because there's no checks and balance, because they all belong to the same group and they all have the same goals. Now, you can talk about the three different branches, but in fact, there is no checks and balance if they're all from the same party. Thank goodness we've never had that problem in our country. But it all started with this idea of let's all get along and have everybody from the same party in the executive branch. And so gradually over the years, the Electoral College has been actually negated from what its original intent was on a couple of instances there that I've shown you. Today we still have this agitation, for instance, and this is going to come even from the Republicans this time, because it may be, and I'm not saying this is what's going to happen, but they're already talking about Romney may win the popular vote, but Obama will get the electoral vote and become reelected. See, so a lot of people are starting to create that idea amongst conservatives and everything. Well, maybe this electoral college thing isn't so good. But the more you bring it into democracy rather than a rule of law through a republic, it is a deterioration of our liberty, and done in a way to make it look like it's more for our liberty when it really isn't. The mob will never be conducive to liberty in this country, particularly when the people that are agitating the mob control the media. Just that simple. Don't get me wrong, I'm not for people voting and that sort of thing, but I do know that you've got to have a check on the mob too. And so how do you do that? You do it by not having a democracy. And don't ever forget, how many here have read the Communist Manifesto? Probably most of you. What is the first step they say that they want to accomplish? It is to win the battle of democracy. And then from that point, they go on from there. But none of the people in the mob say, well, what's step 2? What's step 3? But if you look very closely, they tell you within there, in very short, succinct terms, what the second step is. They want to form a dictatorship of the proletariat. In the name of the mob, they're going to have a dictatorship. But it's those who control the mob, at least in the initial stages, who will be the dictators. And then the next step is to unite all of them into one world government. And if you understand that they have two primary goals, a one world government and the death of God, those are, what was the third one?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. I'm getting old, I forgot what I told them to do. But at any rate, those are the two primary goals, is to, number 1, form a world government, and number 2, let's get rid of this God business. Because they want nothing in the way of your loyalty to government. That is the primary thing. If you read 1984, George Orwell knew this stuff very, very well, and he outlined what it would be like if they get in control. So everything that you look at, if you keep those two things in mind, it doesn't matter whether they're Democrats or Republicans. And if you don't think that there aren't communists within the Republican Party, spend a few minutes with me. In fact, I won't tell you who. I will tell everybody who after the election, okay? But before the election, I'm going to keep my mouth shut. Our founder, Robert Welch, delineated how a group leaders in Europe and the United States, while they were not Communist Party members, they didn't hold a party card, they had spent their entire adult life working for communism in their countries. And so he named a few of them, like Willy Brandt of West Germany, Harold Wilson of England, and I don't remember, Charles de Gaulle. Had worked all their adult life for communism. And then he went down a longer list in the United States, like Nelson Rockefeller and others. And when it's all over, we're going to talk about some things that I think are going to really raise your eyebrows about some of the people in the Republican Party. I worked all my life in the Republican Party, don't get me wrong, until I went on the staff of the society when I can't. So all of my work was in the Republican Party. So I feel that I have a kind of a right to be able to talk about it. But at any rate, we're not ready to talk about it right now, but we will. And I think a lot of people will start saying to themselves, what in the world are we doing here? With that, I think I probably just better leave it alone, and I know everybody's going to run up here. Who is it? Who is it? Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Rob. But we have some business we have to take care of because it's pertinent to next week's meeting. Next week, we will have, our two speakers will be Oklahoma Senate President Pro Tem Brian Bingman from Sapulpa, and we will have State Representative Speaker Designee T.W. Shannon from Lawton as our two speakers. This will be the fourth election cycle in a row. Thank you, Mark. I understand. This will be the fourth election cycle in a row that we've had the top Republican in both the House and the Senate come to speak to us the day after the general election. One of the things that we're going to do this year differently than what we've ever done before is hand them a document that expresses the positions of this organization, kind of representing the grassroots organization. And so those of you, if you're a dues-paying member, if you don't have a ballot yet, if you will come up here. I know Steve, you don't have one yet, and John, Rod. These are, I think there's 6 or 7 additional items here that I put down. I'm going to have to apologize here. It was pointed out to me that I need a spell checker. Yeah, but, oh, okay, yeah, I see. Here, Steve. What you get to? Okay, you got mine then. Okay. In this, let's deal with the first one. What I want you to do is write yes or no out to the left of these. Obviously, there will be a different address to both the senator and to the House. This is just an example here. First one is the following: though not all inclusive are issue positions taken by the members of OCPAC, we recognize there are other Oklahoma citizens with different views. We simply ask your serious consideration regarding these issues. I've tried to soften this to let them know that we're not making demands upon them, and we can't. And not only that, there are other citizens that need to be listened to also besides us. And so that's the start of this. It says, whether President Obama wins or loses, the strength of his support, as well as all liberals, is largely determined upon the number of people that have been made dependent upon government. Therefore, we urge efforts to move people off of dependency and show conservative compassion by helping people to become strong and independent. Following is a Ben Franklin quote from 1766. Quote, I think the best way of doing good to the poor is not making them easy in poverty, but leading or driving them out of it. In my youth, I traveled much. I observed in different countries that the more public provisions were made for the poor, the less they provide for themselves, and of course became poorer. And on the contrary, the less was done for them, the more I'll correct that, and that's, see, spell check doesn't correct that. The more they did for themselves and became richer. One more important quote, the author is unknown. To continually bail a fool out of his problems is to populate the world with fools. You need to really think about that. It's really true. If that's what you're going to do, just over and over and over again, you're called an enabler, and that's what you're going to do. You're going to populate the world with fools. Okay, number one here. Now, I'd like for you to, yes or no, and I'll clean this up, yes or no out to the left of this, whether or not we'll use this as our introductory statement here. We're trying to get them to see something philosophical here. We oppose the expansion of Medicaid and urge a co-payment of perhaps $10 per visit to lessen the cost to taxpayers and to encourage less visits to clinics for the less serious health care problems. And actually was a bill out there 2 or 3 years ago to have everyone on Medicaid pay a $5 copay. And some of the Republicans voted against it because they were afraid the Democrats would formulate campaign literature saying that Republicans want poor people to pay $5 for their health care. Folks, we've got to get over that. We've got to get over that fear. That's not unreasonable. That's not unreasonable to make someone that's getting freebies to become a part of the system here. The next one. We urge serious considerations for the issues raised by the Oklahoma Second Amendment organization, in particular constitutional carry. I believe that's going to be one of their number one issues. And what constitutional carry is without having to have a permit. Why is this important? Again, if you look at the 7 mass genocides of the 20th century, all of them, the government did 2 things before the genocides occurred. Number 1, they required gun registration. That was followed by number 2, gun confiscation. Unfortunately, our concealed carry and open carry law requires a permit, and that permit is the same thing as gun registration there. And so that's something that we've got to keep pushing. They tried to push it through this year. They couldn't get it through. What we hope to see is that our lawmakers understand that these issues that the grassroots care about, they don't go away. We're going to keep pushing on them until we get them through. And we're going to have some different lawmakers in there this year, and some of them I know are dedicated to this. So anyway, the next one. We urge cautious consideration of tying government worker wages to those in the private sector. As an example, salaries for teachers in the private sector average around, and I'm a little low on this, I'm going to correct it, I think it's about $33,000 per year. While government teachers averaging near $45,000 per year, or with government teachers averaging $45,000 per year, such a drastic cut in wages would cause serious upheaval. Now, there's a reason I'm putting this in here, because I know that there's going to be a move to increase government teacher salary this year. And I always believe that salary increases should come based upon the job that you're doing, the merit, the quality of work that you're doing. And there's no evidence that this is going to be on that at this point in time. Goes on to say, with government under the concept of supply and demand, perhaps prison guards need significant pay increases. And we're really short of prison guards all over the state of Oklahoma. And you know, they started about $11 an hour. That's $440 a week. You know, it's really low pay, and it's not a fun job. And so under supply and demand, this is where you need to increase wages. There's not a shortage of teachers in the state of Oklahoma. And then I'll go on the other hand, with long lines waiting to become state troopers, they do not need salary increases. You know what the average salary of a state trooper is in Oklahoma? $80,000 a year.
Wow.
Not too shabby. Okay? All right. Number 4, we oppose government trying to incentivize diversity. If you read my email this week, I think you'll know why that's there. Number 5, because there's a move, and it's being pushed by the state chamber, in my opinion. Number 5, we recognize that virtually all taxes paid to the federal government from the people and businesses in Oklahoma are used for defense, Medicare, Social Security, and highway expenditures. Almost all other federal government spending are the result of deficit spending which must be eliminated. Therefore, we support every effort to wean the state from dependency. Just like we talked about getting people off of dependency, we need to get state government off of dependency. Dependency upon the federal government in these deficit spending areas. Number 6, we recognize the federal government's supremacy clause is to apply to the 17 enumerated powers as described in Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. Therefore, we urge the state of Oklahoma, and this is supposed to be pushback. This is a word, and so it didn't show up on my spell checker, but it will be corrected, okay? We urge the state, therefore we urge the state of Oklahoma to push back against all federal mandates outside of those enumerated powers to help restore American federalism and return the federal government to its proper roles. We're very fortunate in Oklahoma that we have an attorney general who currently has this philosophy. So much so, he's actually created a department in his agency and hired a top constitutional attorney to examine every federal mandate that comes down upon the state of Oklahoma. And the purpose of that is those that are improper, he wants to look at possibly suing. And you see, the states not only have the opportunity to keep, establish, or maintain a proper relationship with the federal government, they have the responsibility to do it. It's more than just the opportunity. So again, obligation, responsibility, whatever you want to call it. So again here, we're trying to, these are just position statements. We're letting lawmakers know where we stand on these things. And as I said earlier, it's not all inclusive. We may come up with more. And then number 7, we urge careful consideration of issues from the organization Restore Oklahoma Public Education, ROPE. We oppose race to the top and common core standards. These are the ones that I ask you to approve today. The others that are down here have already been approved in an earlier meeting. And I'll rearrange these, and we'll probably set 2 or 3 of these as high priorities, and the rest of them more as secondary issues. Any questions on these things? Any questions on any of them? Yes, Glenn.
Charlotte, with that question, the state question on diversity
Eliminate the need for number 4? No. Because they will come up with all kinds of programs to try to do this. And what's happening is most of these diversity programs have been going under the guise of social justice. And they realize how unpopular that term has become. So now they're moving them over to the concept of pro-business. And so they're trying to push these plans in the name of being pro-business. And so I think it's still an important statement. We don't even know how that question is going to come out. I think that question will win, but at this point in time, we don't know how that's going to come out. So. Any other questions?
Charlie?
Yes.
On those measures already approved, I see one on here with a phrase that talks about limiting the number of bills introduced by a House member to 5.
Yeah.
We're for that. I thought we wanted them to be able to introduce whatever they want and they should all be heard.
Well, right now, they have a limit of 8, and it's unlimited in the Senate. And the people that want everything to be heard, the reality of it is, folks, you can want that all you want, but when you have to consider 2,000 bills a year, there is not an ability to truly hear those.
They're not acted on until the last.
And so this is an effort to reduce to a more manageable level, about 800 bills a year. And it's an attempt to give, at least to the people in the majority, the lawmakers in the majority party, at least one silver bullet. I have one bill that I can demand be heard. Now, I want to tell you, it really is a double sword, folks. If you're going to hear every bill, I can guarantee you that Democrats can come up with hundreds of bills that will sound so good to the population, giveaway bills, that will sound so good to the population that they will actually pass and expand the size of government because the Republicans will not vote no on it. It's a double-edged sword, yes.
Can I just address that
Yes.
as a former House staff member?
Okay.
I can tell you that even with the number of bills they have now in the House with a limit of 8, there is absolutely no way that every bill can be heard. The members don't even read the bills that are heard, and so there's no point in letting them have more. They only have a limited amount of time, and the committee process will last for a few weeks, and they absolutely cannot get everything to the floor. It's impossible what they've got now. They need less, and also, with that number of bills, the staff has to write all those, and the staff is already overworked, and they end up having sloppy bills because they don't have time. So a lower limit is absolutely a great idea. It will improve our government.
Yeah. My idea is 4 in the House, but one state lawmaker that I worked with on this wants 5. And, I don't know that you can even get any of this done, but this is a real compromise over the concept of unlimited or hearing every bill, which really has no choice. And I can tell you, I can tell you innumerable times that the ability to kill bills in committee has worked to our favor, hugely to our favor. It's hurt us too from time to time. And we always whine and cry and scream about the time it hurts us. But I can tell you there are times that it would work to our detriment. Yes?
Hey Charlie, should we sign these to give it legitimacy? Put her name at the top?
Well, it's a vote. If you don't care whether your name is recorded as how you vote, you're fine to put your name on that. I don't care. It's a secret ballot. And
I'd like to stand up.
yeah.
No more secret ballots.
No, that was a great little history lesson. And also,
No question, he says the following have already been approved, let me approve by this.
yes, yes, they've already been approved by
Could you
the.
speak just a second about the issue of Tracy Bank going to about the state?
Yeah. One of the things that's happened, particularly because of fiat currency and $16 trillion of national debt now, and what we call dollars or money in our pocket, which if you'll take one out right now and you look at the top of it, I don't have it here, you look at the top of it, it'll say Federal Reserve note. That's really not money. That's an IOU is what that is, and there's nothing behind it. And we are setting ourselves up for a very risky fall and a tremendous cataclysm economically because of operating ultimately with a fiat currency. Last year in the state of Georgia, they had legislation to create sound money. Also in the state of Utah, they actually got their bill passed in Utah. The Utah bill had some points that were stronger than the Georgia bill of Birch license. And it's been my recommendation to some lawmakers, we take those two bills and take the strengths out of both of them and get them passed. Another thing I just learned is the state of Texas has been working on this, but they're doing it piecemeal. They've actually now require investments in the retirement fund to be made by gold and silver. And their retirement funds are in very good condition in Texas. I don't know all the details on that. So when Nathan Dahm, after Nathan won his election, he came here 3 or 4 weeks later to thank everybody for our support. I was talking with him a little bit about this because I thought this would be down in Allen. And he's already researching the thing, and he was glad to hear about Utah and Georgia. So that's all we're trying to say is let's set up some type of a system so that if the federal currency collapses, or when the federal currency collapses, then we have something sound and secure in the state of Oklahoma.
How's that square with the Constitution?
Oh, it's in the Constitution. Yeah, yes, yeah. Yeah, well, as long as it's backed by gold and silver, or it is gold and silver, one or the other. And so it's not a problem, and a lot of people don't know this. My dad has an older sister that used to carry around a silver certificate, $5 bill. I've seen it issued from the bank in Kingfisher. And so we used to actually have banks that issued silver and or gold certificates. So it's not something that hasn't been done before and can't be done. You know, we're all victims, for the most part, of historical ignorance. And the more that we study history, the better idea that we have of our heritage and what has worked in the past. And many of the changes perhaps have been made for convenience, but there's unintended consequence many times for convenience, and that unintended consequence is either a corruption of the system or losses of liberty or something like that. Remember again, never forget this. This is really important. When those 56 men signed that Declaration of Independence, they were not rebel rousers. They were not agrarian reformers. They were not Marxists. They were not communists. They were not the downtrodden. They were not the poor. They were the most powerful, wealthy people in the colonies. And by signing that document, they had nothing to gain financially, because they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. A few of them lost their lives. Almost all of them lost their fortunes. What were they after? They were after liberty. And, you know, there's always a tension between liberty and peace and safety. There's always a tension there. I'll go with liberty in that tension any day. And that was what birthed this nation. And that's what we need to start reclaiming this nation's greatness again and moving away from this big government that promises us peace and safety and prosperity. And I think it was Franklin, it might have been Jefferson, who said that a people that prefer the hope for peace and prosperity over liberty will have neither. And you got to make your mind up which way you're going to go. So, any other questions here? Any other questions? Okay, well, if you would vote and get those up here, I would appreciate it. And we'll try to get this cleaned up. Steve Merrill has some bumper stickers back over here. If you want some clever bumper stickers about this race, come on and get it.